It started on the last day of high school 4 years ago. I had just turned 18 and I was ready to spend my summer having the time of my life before starting college. The final bell rang and practically everybody sprang out of their seats, sprinting for the doors. I watched the stampede as I casually gathered my things and wished my favorite teacher, Mr. Krause, one last goodbye. I strolled through the halls listening to the hollers and excited yells of both upper and lower classmen alike. I got to the front doors, my girlfriend Aries waiting for me. "Took you long enough, Drew?" Her ocean blue eyes staring up at me. "Whoa, that thing's blinding," I yelled out while shielding my eyes and pointing towards her neck. "What, this?" She lifted her necklace up to me. It was the gift I had given her for her 2-year anniversary the week prior. "I'm glad you like it, Aries," I said, putting my arm around her as we left the building. We walked to my car, a 1991 Honda Civic. Thing was a piece of junk, but it was my piece of junk. We hopped in and started our after-school routine, which mostly consisted of grabbing food and driving back to her place to have sex before her little brother got back from school. Imagine our confusion when we pulled into her driveway and saw her dad and little brother waiting for us on the front porch. "Oh no, what are they doing home already?" Aries asked, unbuckling her seatbelt and running out of my car in a hurry. Her dad, Mr. Fletcher, and brother Jimmy were never home early unless something was wrong. I quickly followed behind her, running up the driveway and up the front porch steps. "Go in, Jimmy," Mr. Fletcher said to her brother. We watched as he went inside the house. As the door closed, our gazes shifted from Jimmy to her dad before Aries broke the silence. "Why are you guys home already? What's wrong?" He let out a sigh before speaking. "This morning, 3 kids, all Jimmy's age, went missing. No trace of them. They just disappeared. I have all of unavailable units as well as volunteers combing through the woods right now looking for them. I pulled Jimmy out of school early because it didn't feel safe to have him walking home from school alone. I'm going to go back out there now. Aries, you're in charge of your brother." "Wait, does Jimmy know that kids from his school are missing right now?" Aries asked in a panicked tone. He drew in a deep breath, breathing it out slowly before continuing. "No, one of the missing children is Ben Redding. I think it's best that Jimmy doesn't know about it for now." Ben was Jimmy's best friend. Knew each other since birth, and when Aries and Jimmy's mom died, Ben's mom took on a motherly role for him. "Oh God, we have to go check on Miss Redding," Aries exclaimed, looking at me to agree with her. "We need to stay put, in the house with your brother. It is not safe for him to be at home alone." "I'll go see her. Aries, you stay with Jimmy. I'll call you as soon as I'm done checking on her," I said. Aries looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. "Fine. Please call me to tell me when you know what she's doing," she sighed out. "I will, baby," I said, giving her a kiss. On the drive to Miss Redding's house, I stared up at the dark rain clouds slowly rolling their way in. I felt horrible for Miss Redding. She was recently widowed, and I could only imagine the pain that the fear of losing both of her loved ones brought her. I arrived at her house, the neighborhood eerily quiet for the events that recently took place. In fact, the whole town seemed eerily quiet. No doubt the police were trying to keep this on the down low. As I approached the front door, the quietness was disrupted by the sound of Miss Redding's faint cries from inside her house. Just as I raised my fist ready to knock on the door, I felt my phone buzzing in my pocket. It was Mr. Fletcher. I picked it up. "Hello?" "Drew, I knew you were headed to Miss Redding's house, so I called to let you know first. We found Ben and the other kids. They are all alive, scared but alive. We're on our way to the police station now. Both shocked and excited at the news, I said, "Thank God. I just got to her house. I'll let her know and we'll be on our way to the station." And hung up. With the sound of her cries still ringing through my ears, I knocked loudly on Miss Redding's door. "Miss Redding," I called out loudly, knocking again. I gave her a minute before trying again. "Miss Redding, they found Ben," I yelled. The sound of her cry stopped, and I heard her loud footsteps barreling down the stairs before forcefully swinging the door open. "What did you say?" she asked, her face wet and stained red from her tears. "They found Ben and the others. Aries' dad just called to let me know. They're on their way to the police station now." Miss Redding collapsed into my arms, her sobs starting again. This time, though, they were tears of relief instead of fear. "We have to go to the station," I said. All she could do was nod her head into my chest. With my arm around her for comfort, I walked her to my car. The drive there was somber to say the least. Although Miss Redding felt the relief of her son being found, there was an underlying nervousness in her energy. Periodically, I would glance over to her, and she would be staring out the window in a daze, ferociously biting and picking the skin around her thumbnails. By the time we reached the station, her thumbs were a bloody mess. I reached into the center console, grabbing a handful of old McDonald's napkins that I had been stockpiling for as long as I could remember, and reached my hand out, offering them to her. She perked up in confusion, my offering to her ripping her out of her thoughts. "Huh? Oh, fuck. Thanks," she muttered as she realized the damage had began applying pressure to her self-inflicted wounds. Miss Redding never cussed. In fact, she forbid it from her house. That's how I knew there was a gloom hanging over her despite Ben being found safely. Remembering that I was supposed to call Aries to give her an update, I let out my own, "Oh, fuck." As if she didn't just say the same thing, Miss Redding glanced over at me with a slightly puzzled, slightly disgusted look. I just remembered that I have to call Aries. You go see Ben. I'll meet you in there," I blurted out awkwardly. She nodded at me and got out of the car. Before shutting the door, she turned back. "Thank you for your help, Drew. It means more than you know." I gave her a half smirk. "Of course." I watched and waited for her to get into the police station before dialing Aries. I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, listening to the ring of the dial tone before hearing the click of the line disconnecting. "Hey, it's Aries. Sorry I can't come to the phone." I hung up. Anxiety spiking, I rang her again, but to no avail. 6 long rings. Click. "Hey, it's Aries." I decided to leave a voicemail. "Hey, babe. Sorry I forgot to call you sooner. They found Ben and the other kids. Miss Redding is flustered. Relieved, but flustered. Sorry if I'm springing a lot of information on you. I'm worried because you didn't pick up my calls, Aries. I hope you're okay. Please call me back as soon as you get this message. I love you." Click. I put the phone back into my pocket and buried my face into my hands, rubbing my eyes and letting out several groans before looking up again. I didn't realize how tired I was until now. With Ben and the others being found, I thought the anxiety would be gone, but now another question arose. Where's Aries? Although out of character for her, I wasn't going to let Aries not answering my calls rip me out of my stable mindset. She had always been a comfort to me, saving me from multiple mental breakdowns. If it wasn't for her, I truly don't know what I would do. And now that she isn't here, Stop, focus on your breaths, bring your mind back to reality, I told myself. I closed my eyes and pictured Aries' voice. "Breathe, Drew. Everything will be okay." After a handful of deep, shaky breaths, I opened my eyes again. I had a job to do. I had to be there for Miss Redding and her son. I got out of the car, stretching my arms and taking one last deep breath before heading into the station. As soon as I entered the building, I heard the voice of Miss Redding. She sounded confused, unsettled. She knelt below Ben, who sat in one fabric stackable waiting room chairs, her long fingers stroking the boy's flushed cheek. "Explain what you saw again, baby." "Me, Chelsea, and Nicholas were walking to school together. Nicholas really had to use the bathroom. He said he wouldn't be able to make it to school in time, so he ran into the forest to pee while me and Chelsea waited for him. After a minute or two, we heard Nicholas scream. Each second, his scream got farther away, like he was being carried away by something." Mr. Fletcher stepped in. "And at this point, you and Chelsea hadn't seen the person that took Nicholas?" "Nuh-uh. Me and Chelsea went running into the forest to try to help, following the sound of Nick's yells. I was ahead of Chelsea when the sound of her footsteps stopped all of a sudden. I turned around, but she wasn't there, and that's when I saw it." Ben was sobbing at this point and had to stop, collapsing into his mother's arms. "Shh, it's okay, baby. Mama's got you." Mr. Fletcher clicked his pen against his notepad. "Well, I think we have enough info for now. Why don't you guys go home and get some rest?" Miss Redding nodded and thanked him. I handed my keys over to her. "You guys go wait in the car. I'll be out in a couple minutes." I watched and waited as she picked Ben up and walked out of the police station, thanking Mr. Fletcher one last time. I turned to Mr. Fletcher, his deep blue eyes sunken in, begging for sleep. "So, who took them?" "We don't know. Ben is the only one that saw the suspect. Claims they were taken by somebody who had no face or features at all. Says their entire body was just smooth, pale skin." "No face or body?" I asked. Mr. Fletcher took a deep breath. "Yeah, I said the same thing. Probably just the imagination of a traumatized 10-year-old. I'm going to go back out there with what little daylight I have left." He put his cowboy hat back on and headed for the door. Me and Aries always joked about her dad wearing a cowboy hat. We lived in eastern Pennsylvania, surrounded by Appalachian mountains, and yet he pretended like he was from the heart of Texas. "I'll let Aries know. You be careful," I called out after him. Without turning back around to face me, he raised up a hand, giving a gentle wave before pushing through the glass doors of the police station. I quickly left after he did, getting in my car quietly as to not wake Ben, who was now out like a light on the shoulder of Miss Redding. I sat parked on the curb of Miss Redding's house, staring at the slowly setting sun, trying to reflect back on the day. I spent so much time worried about everyone else that I didn't have time to process how all of this was affecting me. All I could think about was one thing, though. Aries. I checked my phone, still no calls or texts from her. I rang her. 6 long rings. Click. "Hey, it's Aries." I hung up and tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. My own feelings were going to have to wait. With my anxiety peaking, I recklessly peeled out of Miss Redding's neighborhood and drove to Aries' house. Pedal to the floor the entire way. "Where's Aries?" I got to Aries' house, tires screeching as I slammed on the brakes, threw the car into park, unbuckled, and got out of the car. All in one swift motion. I ran inside, and besides my gasping breaths, the house was quiet. I called out to her, but I was met with silence. I ran upstairs, checking each room, but every one of them was empty until I got to Jimmy's room. There Jimmy was, in his bed, out like a light. I walked over to him, tapping my knuckles gently on his forehead. Hey, little dude. He was out cold. I would have checked his pulse had I not seen him breathing. Dude, I said a little bit louder, shaking his shoulder this time. Still no luck. The fuck? I whispered. This was just like how Ben was in my car. Even through the drive back to the house was bumpy. Pothole-filled ride. Ben didn't make a sound or move a muscle the entire car ride. I decided to let Jimmy rest. If anything, he was just sleeping off a long day. I inspected the rest of the top floor but found no more clues. With the panic inside of me rising, I felt as though I was moving in slow motion, as if I was fighting a water's current with every step. I trudged down the stairs, grasping tightly onto the railing, wading my way down into the kitchen. There, lying on the counter, was a sheet of computer paper. I picked it up and read the words, scribbled across the page, "Taking Jimmy to the park. Be back soon. Aries." Although phones existed, Aries and her dad liked to leave notes to each other about their whereabouts. Why? Your guess is as good as mine. Thoughts were so jumbled in my head that I couldn't pick out a single one. All I knew was that going to the park was probably the best chance I had at finding Aries. After all, she wasn't in the house. Questions ran through my head. Why was Jimmy in the house, but not Aries? Who took the 3 kids this morning? Was me going out alone safe? Where's Aries? I ran to my car, flooring it the entire way there. I sprinted up the pathway, scanning the park and the forest that surrounded the dilapidated jungle gym. Where's Aries? Aries! I screamed out, running around the tree line, hoping, praying that my girlfriend would call back to me. I had almost reached the end of the tree line when I stepped on something hard, metallic. I looked down and immediately burst into tears. Aries' necklace. That same one that I had gotten her for her 2-year anniversary a week prior. Collapsing onto the ground, I clutched the necklace, putting it close into my chest as I sobbed into it. As I laid there in the fetal position, I heard the familiar ding of my phone telling me that I got a text message. A sudden feeling of tiredness washed over me. My eyes were beginning to close, but still, I reached into my pocket to see who texted, hoping it would be Aries. Sure enough, it was. Before passing out at the edge of the forest floor, I read the words she texted me. "Hey Drew, I can't wait for you to see my new face." By the time my eyes finally opened, the sun had begun to rise. I laid in the cold and dewy morning grass, listening to the birds chirping all around me, and, for a moment, I was at peace. At peace until my mind finally came back to reality, and I remembered how I got to the edge of the forest in the first place. Where's Aries? I zapped myself out of my daze of tiredness and picked up my phone to see if I had any more texts from Aries. I clicked the home button, but all I was met with was a black screen. Dead. I threw it back onto the ground in frustration as my panic began to rise. My thoughts raced so quickly that it made my head feel heavy. I had so many questions, but only one stuck out to me. Where's Aries? For some reason, I knew that the answer to that was in the forest. Robotically, I started making my way into the thicket. Although I was moving, it was as if I had no control over my actions, like I was a character in a video game, being controlled by a player. I trekked into the forest, my body getting cut by the unavoidable dense shrubbery. I went on like this for what felt like miles. My legs were battered and tired, and yet I kept going. I had to find the girl that I loved so dearly. Sometime into my journey, I came across a deer, drinking from a stream. I was infatuated and walked slowly up on the animal, being careful not to startle it. When I got about 10 yards away, it looked towards me, and for a brief moment we locked eyes. That eye contact didn't last long, however. The deer's ears perked up and its head snapped 90 degrees to its right. For a moment it looked off into the distance before turning and running off as fast as it could in the opposite direction. The deer was running away from something that I was making my way to. By this time, fear and anxiety had almost overtaken me, but I continued on. Occasionally, other animals would dart past me, trying to get away from whatever was on my path. The only thing to keep me from losing my mind was the sounds of the birds chirping, but eventually that stopped too. The forest was dead silent. A predator was nearby, and I was headed straight towards it. Soon after the birds stopped chirping, I came across a clearing, and that's when I saw her, Aries, with her back towards me, naked in the middle of the clearing. Excitement overcame me as I watched her long black hair flow with the wind. "Aries!" I called out to her, but she didn't respond. Although my legs were jelly at this point, I jogged over to her, slowing back down to walking as I got a few feet away from her. I noticed as I got closer that she was staring straight down at the ground, but I couldn't tell what she was looking at. I approached her. "Baby?" I said softly, putting my hand on her back. She didn't respond. All I could hear was what sounded like faint, muffled laughs, as if she was laughing with her mouth closed. I walked around her and looked down at whatever she was staring at, but there was nothing. Just the green grass of the clearing. My eyes shifted back up to her head and I put my hands on her shoulders. "Aries, look at me. Are you okay? What happened? Where's your clothes?" She began to slowly lift her head up. When her eyes got to my knee level, her head snapped upwards, her head cracking as she looked me directly in the eyes, her laughs behind her closed mouth getting louder and louder each second she stared at me. Her mouth began to curl into a grin and then into a full-on smile from ear to ear, the edges of her lips splitting open as she stretched them inhumanly far. When her lips ran out of room to stretch, her mouth began to open. Pale, translucent skin replaced what should have been teeth. I watched in horror as her mouth gaped open, veins and arteries protruding out of the skin that replaced her mouth. This wasn't my girlfriend anymore. This was the thing that took Ben and the other kids. I tried removing my hands from the monster's shoulders, but before I could, it grabbed my wrists, gripping them with so much strength that it felt like my bones would shatter. It reared its head back and headbutted me, knocking me on my ass. In a daze, I saw the creature approaching me, still with that unnatural smile stretched across its face. It was enjoying this. Before I could get up, it kicked my chin as hard as it could, knocked my head back and sending me 2 front teeth directly into my tongue. As I laid there, swallowing and spitting out my own blood, the creature approached, towering over me. At this point, I hadn't fought back yet because in my mind, this thing was still my girlfriend. Between fight or flight, I chose freeze. My fear and sadness turned into anger as I realized that this monster took my girlfriend from me. And as that anger peaked, I chose to fight. The thing leaped up, trying to get on top of me, but I reacted quickly with a swift kick to its stomach. It recoiled, grasping its arms around where I kicked. Wasting no time, I sprang up onto my feet and delivered a clean left hook, straight into the jaw of the creature, feeling the crunch of its bones as my fist connected. Memories of Aries and I flashed through my head like a picture book. when I asked her to be my girlfriend, our first date and first kiss, our anniversary the week prior, all of the good memories we had and were going to make, taken away from us by whatever the fuck this thing was. I lost it. I looked at the monster and no longer saw my girlfriend. I saw it for what it was. My brain went on autopilot, and I let my body do the thinking for me. I hit the creature over and over again, blood squirting out of its nose and onto my fists and arms as I continued my volley of blows. When the monster's face was plump, swollen, and unrecognizable, I stopped for a moment and listened to the moans that were blocked by the thin skin of its mouth. By this time, the thing was lying on its back. This time, I towered over it. I bent down, grasping my hands around its neck and squeezing as hard as I could. As I squeezed, the thin layer of skin that covered the monster's mouth began to rip open, revealing a set of teeth. Aries teeth. Now the creature was gasping for air. It was so human-like. At this point, it looked just like Aries, and for a moment, I saw the thing that I was killing as her, but it wasn't. I was killing the monster that took her away from me. Eventually, the creature stopped struggling and stopped gasping for air. For some reason, though, I kept on squeezing. The pain of losing my girlfriend washed over me, and so I squeezed and squeezed. I was so lost in my daze that I didn't hear the approaching footsteps of the search party behind me. "Put your hands where I can see them," Mr. Fletcher screamed from behind me. I pushed up off the ground onto my feet, putting my hands up and turning around as I looked into the barrels of Mr. Fletcher's and the other police officers' guns. As he realized who he was aiming at, Mr. Fletcher lowered his gun, a look of shock forming on his face. His eyes shifted from me to the body on the ground, realizing who it was, and he ran towards him. The other officers following behind him. I watched as he collapsed onto the ground, cradling who he thought was his daughter in his arms. A police officer crashed into me, tackling me to the ground, putting my arms behind my back, and throwing a set of handcuffs on me. Mr. Fletcher stayed there, holding his daughter, as the other officers escorted me out of the woods and into the back of the police car. They took me to the same police station that I was in not even a full day prior. Nobody believed me when I told them the story. I told them what Ben saw was real, that it wasn't just his imagination. Everyone just saw me as a lunatic that murdered his girlfriend in cold blood, though. Now I will spend the rest of my life in a prison cell for killing the monster that killed my girlfriend, which is what everybody sees me as now. A monster. If you're wondering how I'm able to type this from prison, I made buddies with one of the guards and he snuck me his phone to use for the morning. Now everyone will know the truth. Know that I'm not some psycho murderer. Everyone I've ever known thinks that I'm crazy. Do you?